When I talk about the Bible, people ask about the Bible. What I'll say is which Bible? Because there are over 40 different versions of the Bible out there that have been translated over the years. Is the timeline, or are the events of the timeline that we are living, is it mapped out as a script? There's one big war between good and evil that is the theme throughout the biblical text. But there are many battles. We're also living a time that's being called the time of the Great Reset. When the Christian Bible was created, it incorporated the Torah into what we call the Old Testament, the Christian traditions. And that 1,000 years of peace ultimately is followed by the Great War, the final battle between good and evil, light and dark. All right, there is a timeline. So let's take a look at this timeline. The Torah codes, the Bible codes, do not make predictions, and they're not prophecy. However, biblical traditions do make prophecy, and there are prophetic timelines, and there's a prophetic sequence of events that we very probably are experiencing right now. And I'll show you why I say that here in just a moment. Are we advancing in this timeline? And I want you to see what the potential of the Psalm 83 war is all about. So when it comes to the question as to whether or not we're following some kind of a script, an ancient script, the question is, who would have known about those scripts, and how would they have shared that information with us? Is this what the ancient prophets were actually talking about? Well, as I mentioned earlier, we're going to zero in on biblical prophecy from a historical timeline perspective. And when we do that, what we find is there were a number of prophets throughout the Bible, through both the Old and the New Testament, approximately 23 biblical prophets. In their tradition, from their perspective, we are living what is called the end of days or the end times. It doesn't mean the end of the world, certainly, because the earth is still here, and some people are still here, depending on where you are in your perspective. But it is the end of a cycle. It is the end of one kind of time, the beginning of another kind of time. So when we talk about the end times or the end of days, there are a series of wars that the prophets said would unfold leading up to 1,000 years of peace, leading up to a number of spiritual and religious events that would unfold. And the prophets that talked about those primarily were the prophet David, Daniel, Ezekiel, Isaiah, and John the Elder. So this is John that was writing the book of Revelation, for example. There are other prophets that talk about these things. They refer to them in one way or another, but these are the primary prophets. All right, there is a timeline. So let's take a look at this timeline. None of the wars that are prophesized are possible or would have been possible until the nation of Israel was established. So up until 1948, there was all kinds of questions about where we are in the timeline, where we are in the history of these prophecies. And those conversations solidified in 1948 when the United Nations delineated the boundaries for the nation of Israel, as well as for the Palestinian people. There were there were multiple spaces on the land, but there were two nations that were established under the UN, or identified under the UN in 1948. So when Israel became established in the 20th century, reestablished in the 20th century, and again, I'm hesitating because there's so much history here, and I don't want to get bogged down the history because we're going somewhere, and many of you know much more about this and are much more informed than I am. I want to get to a point on this. So when Israel was established, 1948, that set into motion the possibilities of this timeline. There was a war that broke out the day that the nation was established. Israel and the Arab neighbors went to war in 1948. There was another war in 1967. There was another war in 1973. And there was another war in 1987, as well as conflicts that have happened since that time. 1967, you're probably familiar with this, it's called the Six-Day War. I actually remember when this happened. We had black and white televisions during that time. Sounds crazy. And I remember watching tanks, armored tanks, rolling through the streets of Jerusalem when this war broke out in 1967. I remember the 1973 war as well, the Yom Kippur War. 1987, of course, we all probably remember this. It was the first Intifada. This was a Palestinians against the Israelis, based on a number of events that had created a tension, and there was a spark that ignited what was called the first Intifada in 1987. We've had a number of intifadas since that time. All right, so those wars happened. Now, from the biblical perspective, all of this is leading to a war, a great war, between what is called Gog and Magog. Magog is a place, Gog is an individual. And I'll talk about these more in another video. But the point is that this great war, all of these events have to precede the Gog-Magog War. The Gog-Magog War then is followed by 7 years of really, really difficult times on the planet called the tribulation. 7 years of the tribulation that end in another even greater war called the War of Armageddon. And those of you that have been with us on our trips into the Holy Lands, we've actually been to this location. It is a valley. There's a high point where you overlook the valley where this great battle is prophesied to unfold, because it is followed by 1,000 years of peace. And that 1,000 years of peace ultimately is followed by the great, great war, the final battle between good and evil, light and dark, and all the implications around that. And I'm choosing my words carefully because I know in this day and age, a lot of words are triggering for people, and I want to convey an idea without getting lost in the baggage of what a lot of these things mean to different people. So what you're looking at is a prophecy of wars following a timeline, and the wars are sequential. Before the Gog-Magog War can happen, there is another war that must happen, and it's the war that we're talking about right now, the Psalm 83 war. In the book of Psalms, so if you look at Psalms 83, we will look at a portion of this. The question that's being asked right now is, are the events that began with October 7th and the events that have followed, the military events that have followed from that time, not just in Israel, but in Lebanon, in Syria, in Yemen, relationships with Iran, Egypt, and Jordan, are they all part of the Psalm 83 war? Are we living this biblical timeline right now? Well, we don't know. I don't know the answer to this. What I do know is there are benchmarks that you and I can watch for, and I think if these benchmarks are going to appear, they're going to appear pretty quickly, based on the events that are happening in the Middle East right now. There's another piece of this that I want to talk about. In Christian traditions, the Psalm 83 war, if that is happening, another reason that so many are examining what's happening in the Middle East and Israel right now with a magnifying glass, is because there is a prophesied event called the rapture event. And the rapture event is linked with what many now are calling ascension. And there's a whole series of conversations about ascension. It means different things to different people. And we will talk about that in a different program as well. I want to stay focused on this, but I want to honor that the rapture event is where people of belief will be saved from the hard times that come through the Gog-Magog War and the tribulation, the seven years. I'm also going to acknowledge there's controversy about when that rapture happens. There is a school of thought that says Gog-Magog happens first, then the rapture, so that those people don't have to go through the 7 years of tribulation. There's another school of thought that says the rapture happens to save them from the horrors of the Gog-Magog War. So I just wanted to identify that Psalm 83, the Psalm 83 war that we may be seeing the early stages of right now, is directly linked and is being watched very closely because of its relationship to the rapture. All right, so what is Psalms 83? We're going to come back to this timeline in just a moment, by the way. What does Psalms 83 say? Well, when I talk about the Bible, people ask about the Bible. What I'll say is which Bible? Because there are over 40 different versions of the Bible out there that have been translated over the years, different interpretations from different languages. And the version I'm going to refer to now is the King James Version, KJV. It was translated from the Greek, and the Greek is some of the closest to the original texts, linking it to the Dead Sea Scrolls and the Qumran and the Essenes and all of those things. So Psalm 83, and I'm not going to go through the whole thing, it's lengthy. I'm going to go through the part that talks about the war. So there's a context where Psalms 83 is talking about the nation of Israel, all right, that's happening preceding to this. Then this is a direct quote. It says, "Come, let us cut them off." Them is Israel. Those are my parens because of the context I'm not including here that came before this, the lengthy context before this. It says, "Come, let us cut them off from being a nation, that the name of Israel may be no more in remembrance." Now, those are, frightening words, but you hear things like this in other traditions. Here's where the specifics come in. This prophecy gives the names of the nations that will converge upon Israel to destroy this nation. It gives the names in the ancient idiom, the names that were common during that period of time. So I'm going to go through these. Then we're going to look at a map, and we're going to look at the modern names of those nations. And I think if you haven't seen this, I think you might be surprised at what you're going to see. The tabernacles of Edom and the Ishmaelites. All right, tabernacles are, in biblical traditions, are called tents or places of congregation. So now we would call these essentially nations. So the nations of Edom and the Ishmaelites, again, we're going to define who these are in modern terms in just a moment, of Moab and the Hagarenes, of Gebel, Ammon, Amalek, the Philistines, with the inhabitants of Tyre. Assur is also joined with them. All right, so here in this prophecy, it's so specific. And again, this is not part of the Bible code's possibilities. This is a prophetic vision, and in this case, from the book of Psalms, David, that was primarily responsible for these, is identifying specific nations and locations that will converge upon Israel. So what are these in modern times? Well, the ancient name of Edom is now part of southwestern Jordan. So the political boundaries, the borders that delineate these places in modern times were different in the past. Some were similar, some were very, very different. So Edom is now what we know as southwest Jordan. The Ishmaelites are Saudis. This is Saudi Arabia. Moab is southern Jordan. The Hagarenes are Syria. Gebel is northern Lebanon and northern Jordan. There's a place where those two were much closely related before the borders of the modern nations were put there. Ammon is northern Jordan. Amalek is Egypt, and specifically it's the Sinai that shares a border with Israel. And this is interesting because Israel actually captured the Sinai during the war in the 70s and then returned it to Egypt for a number of reasons. They gave it back. But that part of Egypt is said to be converging upon Israel. The Philistines are the area that now geographically is known as the Gaza area, that part of Israel, Western Israel. Tyre is Lebanon to the north of Israel, and Assur is northern Iraq. All right, so these are all familiar countries in modern terms. Now let's take a look and plug those back into Psalms 83. It says, "Come, let us cut them off from being a nation. The name of Israel may be no more in remembrance. They are confederate against thee." Who is confederate? Well, the tabernacles of southwestern Jordan and Saudi Arabia, of southern Jordan and Syria, of northern Lebanon, northern Jordan and Egypt. The Gazans with the inhabitants of southern Lebanon. Iraq is also joined with them. Now we have a really specific prophecy. There's no ambiguity here. The prophecy is saying, Psalms 83 is saying, these are the nations that will converge upon Israel. So now let's take a look at this map, and it's still, I know it's not that big, because Israel is this is just the mind blower. It is the tiny, tiny strip of land in the Middle East that is ground zero for everything that we're seeing here. All right. Here it is. There's Israel right there, and you can see Jordan is just to the right. Syria is just to the north. Iraq is just on the other side of Jordan. Lebanon is just north of Syria. You can't even hardly see it there. The Sinai, you see, in Saudi Arabia. So this is called the inner circle of the Psalms 83 war. So the inner circle of nations are the nations identified in the 83rd Psalm. They're all the nations that are involved right now. What will happen at the end of this war, when this war is over, is it opens the door to a greater war in what's called the outer circle. Where this bleeds over into the events that are happening in Eastern Europe and Ukraine, for example, is the United States has weaponized our dollar against the nations who have been using the dollar since the end of the Cold War in terms of Russia, and since the end of World War II in terms of Bretton Woods and the petrodollar and all these other things. All commodities have been traded in dollars since the end of World War II. By us weaponizing the dollar against Russia, cutting Russia off from the SWIFT banking system and from the dollar, we have pushed Russia away into collaboration with other nations. And because we have abused the power of the dollar through inflation by printing so much money and by creating so much debt that the value of the dollar is so low that many of these nations are now turning away from the dollar to other currencies, including Saudi Arabia, working with Iran, including Russia, working with Iran because Russia needs their oil and gas, and they have technological alliances as well. So all to say that these relationships of the outer circle are not so far-fetched. They're already, the foundations are already in place. They're already there. It's how far will these relationships go? So the Psalm 83 war leads to the greater war of the outer circle and the outer circle nations. How will we know if we're in the Psalm 83 war? Well, we're already seeing some of those signs because the Psalm says this is a coalition. And the first time this has ever happened, we already have an inner coalition of Jordan, Saudi Arabia, Egypt, Lebanon, Gaza, and Iraq. That coalition is already there. So we can tick that off. For the first time, we have that coalition. Isaiah 17 also talks about this from a historic perspective and gives a very clear benchmark that the city of Damascus will be destroyed. Isaiah 17 says, "Behold, Damascus is taken away from being a city and shall be a ruined heap." It's pretty clear. Damascus is in Syria. And there are already military operations from the IDF against Damascus because Iran is sending supplies and weapons, missiles, into Lebanon through Damascus. So Israel has, and this has been happening for the last couple of years, so this is not new. Damascus has already been a military target. It's not destroyed, it's still there. And hopefully it won't be. But this is something we can watch for. If we see a lot of action happening, and you start seeing this in the news, military strikes, heavy strikes against Damascus to the point where the city is leveled, we will have fulfilled this part of the prophecy. In the end, the Psalm 83 war, Israel prevails, and those armies are destroyed from the inner circle, and this is what provokes the outer circle war. Those inner armies are destroyed, so Hezbollah and Hamas are destroyed, but then the outer, Iran and Saudi Arabia and the other large nations that are now also aligned with China and Russia because of moving away from the dollar economically. China and Russia are now aligned with many of these outer circle nations. So it's not a good recipe. It's not a good recipe at all. So the armies are destroyed, and that's what opens the door. It leads to an outer coalition and the great war between Gog and Magog. So here we are looking at this prophecy again. You can see where the outcome of the Psalm 83 war, number one, whether or not it happens, whether or not we're in it right now, and number two, the outcome leads to the Gog-Magog war, the tribulation, Armageddon war, 1,000 years of peace, and then the ultimate, the final battle between good and evil, and all the implications around that. So we all know that something is up. This is not business as usual. We've got collapsing economies. We've got the attempt to remake the world through social engineering, artificial intelligence. Social media is playing a large role in that. Big corporations in cahoots with the military and with the government. We've never had this formula. We've never had this combination of events unfolding in a technological world that allows the advancement of so many of these ideas. You can have the ideas, but if you can't advance them, they're not going to do much good. The technology is now allowing the advancement, and we've talked about this in other videos. The vision of the World Economic Forum, the relationship now that's been established with the United Nations to implement much of that vision through the Sustainable Development Goals, SDG 2030, and the movement to centralize power and control and authority financially in terms of healthcare decisions. We've all been through this, and we'll see it continue. And now militarily. All this tells us this is no ordinary time in history. This is why I was having the conversation with John. So these are not spontaneous, they're not random. These things aren't just happening. They are planned and they're being executed in a sequential fashion. Are we living a time where the events unfolding, this is the Gog-Magog outer circle that I was talking about. Are we living the prophecies that we see, not just the biblical prophecies, but I'm talking about those today because they are so specific with names of nations, but so many other traditions, Native American traditions. Hopi say we will have a third shaking. The first two great shakings, World War I, World War II. If you ask them, they don't know what the third shaking is, but they know that it is yet to come, and the signs for that shaking are appearing right now. The Mayan calendar told us that 2012 was the pivot point, but there was a buffer of 18 years before and after 2012, a 36-year window where a cycle, because cycles don't stop on a dime, they take time to wind down and then gear up for the next cycle. So the 2012 cycle actually ends in 2030. That's 18 years after 2012. So they talk about these things, as well as Edgar Cayce and more with maybe metaphor, Nostradamus, subject certainly to interpretation. But the biblical timelines are very specific. Those are the nations involved. They're the nations that are involved in what we're seeing right now. The question I asked John is, do we as conscious beings, as spiritual beings, have the right to self-determination of our future? Can we awaken to the point where we can have the 1,000 years of peace without the Gog-Magog, without the tribulation, without the Armageddon war? Now, I don't know the answer to that. The prophecies are very clear and say these things must happen based upon the prevalence of good and evil and the ratios of good and evil in the world that they saw in the prophecies. Because ultimately, every one of these battles is a battle that comes down, yes, greed is involved, yes, power is involved, yes, money and control and centralization, all those are involved, but those are all expressions of evil. And good and evil, the relationship between those. So if we are living the final battles between good and evil, maybe these things must unfold so that we can become the people of peace that we know we are in our hearts, and create the world of peace that we know is possible in our lives. Maybe they are possible. If we sidestepped these wars, if we broke the prophecies, what would be the implications of that? Do we have the power to do that? Is it something that we would want to do? These are the kinds of questions that John and I talk about all the time. And now I'm sharing this with you because so many people had so many questions. We had a lot of questions based on the previous video that we did, so I wanted to be a little bit more specific here. Are we following an ancient script? I'd like to know what you think. Is the timeline, or are the events of the timeline that we are living, is it mapped out as a script? And if it is mapped out, do we succumb to that script, or do we, by virtue of consciousness and our free will, is it part of our destiny to transcend, not necessarily even fight, but to become more than where that script apparently leads? One of the ways that I've gone about looking at this is looking at biblical history. Back in the 1990s, I became a member of an organization that's called BAR, Biblical Archaeology Review. It was fascinating, John, because it was moving away from the religiosity of the Bible, rather looking at the Bible as a historical document of events that actually occurred. Now, when I was a kid, a lot of the things in the Bible, I was growing up in the 50s, 60s, a lot of people thought, those were make-believe things. And what Biblical Archaeology Review and some other organizations did is they began to take the Bible as a literal document of history, regardless of the religion. And so they'd say, well, according to the Bible, these things happen here. What if we dig here? And we had sites like Ashkelon, just north of Gaza. And I've had the opportunity to be there personally, to visit the archaeological sites in Ashkelon and Jericho and the tunnels under Solomon's temple and things like that. So what the Bible has shown historically is that it is based on information that is factual. When we think about a scripted timeline, the question is, how deep do those facts run? And where this gets really interesting is because the events that we're seeing in the Middle East right now are playing out eerily similar to actually two timelines that we see in parts of the Old Testament. So I'll be specific, and this is all in the Old Testament. There's one big war between good and evil that is the theme throughout the biblical text, but there are many battles. And there are two big battles that are identified. One of them is a mysterious battle, Psalms 83. And another one is the big one that people hear about in Ezekiel. Ezekiel was at 38 and 39. At the end of time in the valley of Armageddon near Megiddo. And I've been to those places as well. So the reason I'm thinking about this now is because the Psalm 83 battle identifies nations in biblical times that will converge, that will turn and converge upon Israel. And when we look at the modern names of those nations, it's exactly what's playing out right now, with a couple of exceptions that have to change. And if we see those exceptions change, we're following this map that was laid out over 3,000 years ago. One of those exceptions is right now, Israel is on reasonably good terms. It's called a cold treaty with Jordan and with Egypt. 1979, the Camp David Accords with Egypt. Egypt now, for the first time since 1979, is threatening to walk away from those accords. And if that happens, it is actually fulfilling what some people call the prophecy of Psalm 83, leading to the next great war. There are inner nations and outer nations. Psalm 83 is about the inner nations of Lebanon and Syria and Jordan and Egypt and what we now call Gaza. The Ezekiel is about the outer nations, where they say the great nations from the north, Iran and Russia, converge with other nations. Turkey is part of that. They call it Persia, which is now Iran, Tyre, which is now Lebanon. So the question, as I'm looking at this, first, it's eerie how similar the events are that are playing out now that are described in those texts. So, number one, how did that happen? Is it a case of ancient remote viewers? Is that what we call those prophets? And number two, are we bound to those timelines, or through the free will of our consciousness that's also described, can we transcend those timelines? And I'm just wondering if you thought much about that, John. This is like a bigger picture.
Well, what I think about when you say that is that we're back in simulation world again.
Yeah.
That this is some kind of a deterministic environment. That certainly you have latitude within the game space, if you will, within the design of the rules of the operating space, but you can't get outside, outside of your lane. But you can run across and try any number of other kind of things. Now, it's a kind of a simplistic. It's clearly more complex and sophisticated than that. Yeah. But there is something. I mean, this goes back to kind of the cyclical nature of reality. This goes almost directly to the underlying principles and the concepts underneath Martin Armstrong's computer, Socrates, and which says that everything in this reality is based upon some kind of a cyclical, oscillatory kind of process. And so no matter whether you take the weather or politics or education or family relationships or, anything around, Armstrong's got 75 of them that he's isolated and got figured out. He says, it just keeps coming together and they keep doing it. And sometimes they're additive, sometimes they're subtractive and so on. But that's, again, like saying it's a big machine that you're inside of. And that and it is therefore predictable, which of course is what Marty Armstrong uses the whole thing for. And so you've just raised it to another kind of level. One of the interesting things about the last maybe decade is this, the kind of the emergence of this idea, for me at least, is the emergence of this idea of this living in a simulation. And As you know, I've had a number of experiences where I've been kind of shown that it's a simulation of one sort or another, and that then raises all kinds of deep kind of questions about what is this all about, and is there a God, and what's heaven, and all these kinds of things that I at least grew up with that were kind of the core components of the operating space that we were constrained with. And so, no, I think it's really quite interesting.
Well, so when I think about this from the mathematic perspective, when I've done seminars based on this, I'm just going to first acknowledge it's a very different way of thinking for a lot of people. You and I toss around these terms and ideas, and if this is new for some people, when you think of a simulation, it is based on an iterative formula. And when I spent a lot of time studying fractals when I was in the defense industry, in terms of software development. And fractals are fascinating, and they're so simple, John. And the whole idea of a fractal is that you have the fractal image that we're used to seeing is the picture representation of a mathematic formula.
Of course.
And when you shift that formula, so the formula is represented by the letter R, for example, and you shift the formula R plus one, the plus one could be a change in the environment. It could be a change in society. It could be a change in our belief systems. R plus one, that then becomes the input for the next iteration of that calculation. Well, where this gets interesting is that the best science of the modern world has shown us they have reduced our natural world into some combination of only about 4 fractal patterns.
Wow.
That are combined, and they are iterative. That is what a simulation is. That's what keeps the simulation running. It's every time something changes, then that change is fed back into the equation. So from that perspective, my question, what I think about is, within that formula, I see no reason that we do not have the latitude and the freedom to break out of those fractal patterns, to create new fractal patterns. I don't think it would break the simulation. And I've had people say to me, well, you're going to break the simulation. I don't think it would do that.
Well, how then is it predictive in the terms that you're kind of suggesting?
Well, I think this is the essence of what our lives and our time are all about. That we've also heard that this is an experiment, that we're living this great experiment where we have some degree of free will. So if we follow and succumb to the script, we're not using, I guess we're using our free will to follow what we believe is predetermined. And if we are to take the freedoms that have been described, whether it's the biblical text or whether it's in biological text or whatever it is, of choice, free will, and consciousness, and we choose not to follow that timeline, we choose not to have those wars. Now, I see nothing that prevents us from doing that, but everyone that I talk to and all of the sources I'm looking at feel that it is predetermined, so it must come to pass. And I don't know that that's true.
Well, I don't know that it's true either, but if it turns out to be the true, then you're into, what is who are humans, and what is this purpose of this human experience? And you're in these deep kind of existential kind of questions that I'm not particularly interested in.
Well, I think there are layers to this, John, and I think the simulation, I think the evidence strongly supports some kind of a simulation. It may not be what we think of as a computer program on a disk, the universe as a simulation. I think what we're seeing is that at least there are portions of our simulation that may have been hijacked, or there's an intervention that maybe was not accounted for initially that's driving us toward these very dark outcomes. When you look at the biblical text, the purpose of the wars is to erase the darkness and to enter into 1,000 years of peace, or 1,000 years of, without the evil. And I'm wondering, are the wars the only way to get there? Can we create that peace? If we're in a simulation, can we create that peace without having the wars? Psalm 83, now this is, 2,000-year-old language, 3,000-year-old language. It actually says, let us destroy them as a nation so that Israel's name is remembered no more. The other interesting thing I see in here, John, nowhere, either in the mathematic codes that we've talked about, called the Bible codes or the Torah codes, or in the biblical text. I'm reaching over here because I've got a stack of old Bibles here. I collect them. Nowhere is the United States of America mentioned. And to me, that says a couple of possible things. Either by the time these events unfold in the timeline, America as we know it no longer exists. We've talked about this, about the breakup of America, or America does exist, but it's no longer called America. Maybe it has a different name. But the experiment that began over 200 years ago of giving people the right to self-determination and the freedoms to do that appears to be winding down, coming to an end. And at least on these timelines, you would think, as the most powerful nation on the face of the earth, on these great battles, that we would be involved and mentioned in some way. And I personally don't see that. I'm still looking into it, but I don't see it from what I've seen so far.
Well, as you know, Martin Armstrong's computer says that there's a global civil war between 2025 and 2027, after which the United States breaks up as a country, and there are 5 other countries that get formed in North America. So, you always have that kind of possibility.
So now we've got 2 scenarios playing out that are interacting. We've got this scenario, this simulation, where we're barreling down this script toward a confrontation that ultimately leads to freedom and peace.
Yeah.
It's a big picture. We also have what you and I talked about recently on, I think, one of these episodes, where there is a movement to hijack humanness and to hijack this planet, which appears to be counter to the big script that we're talking about.
The catalyst, of course, that kicks the system up, and everybody stands up and says, enough of this, and we're not going to do this anymore, because it's certainly raising up to some level. There's a threshold somewhere where, you talk about the truckers they're not going to do it now, but the truckers who are going to kind of shut down New York, there's a lot of stuff that can be done that hasn't yet been done, and that could really disrupt the kind of.
Oh yeah. Well, I think for our viewers, I'm just going to say, I know this is a very different way of thinking for a lot of people. John and I spend a lot of time systems thinkers, looking at big pictures that are driving the minutia of our everyday lives. And whether this makes sense or not, I think what we're seeing is this is a time where we identify clearly for ourselves, and then we claim. It's not enough to be aware of it. We must claim the values that we cherish as individuals and families, certainly as communities, societies, hopefully as a nation, whatever those values are for us. And I think almost universally, life and freedom are among those. At least that's what we say. And now we're going to be given the opportunity to put into action what it means and how much we cherish those, as there are forces that would like to take them from us, including our very human nature. Our humanness is on the line. We all know that ChatGPT can be used to write books, to write papers, to write music, to write songs, very controversial. about how it's being used. This is a perfect example of a technology that's developed faster than the values or the morals of how that technology is being used. And that's going to work its way through our society. We're going to figure that out. The idea that was proposed in this science conference was to use AI to rewrite the Bible for a number of reasons. And I'm going to share a video clip with you here in just a moment and a little slide presentation of why I believe it's such a bad idea. But one of the statements made in the video is that it would be an opportunity to get religion correct, implying that for some reason the religions that we have today are incorrect. And also, it was implied that the religions of today were all created by humankind, and that the religions, the great religions of the world, have always talked about a non-human source for the religious texts, the time when a non-human source would make those texts available. And the suggestion was that AI may be that non-human source. Well, who is to say that the religious texts that we have today were not created by a non-human source, at least some of them? And I think you'll see what I mean here in just a moment. Now, I want to be really clear about where I'm coming from. There's a context within which all this is happening. This isn't just out of the blue. And the context is that we are living a time of extremes. You all know that for a lot of reasons, and I've talked about that in a number of other videos. We're also living a time that's being called the time of the Great Reset. Some people think it's a conspiracy. Some people don't take it very seriously. The bottom line to the Great Reset is it is a proposal and a series of policies that will remake the world. What that means is that there's going to be an effort to reshape the world and to reshape our lives in ways that we have never seen between now and 2030. And the problem that I have with this idea is that there are things in the world that are unsustainable. There are things in the world that are broken. There are things in the world that are corrupt. We live in a world of broken and corrupt systems that have been abused, good systems and power that has been abused through greed, through fear. And we all know that. There's no secret around that. The problem with the Great Reset is it is coming from an organization that is made of unelected officials. You and I did not ask these people to represent us. But the whole principle of the World Economic Forum, these are executives, leaders of nations, religious leaders, scientific, technological leaders that have come together to share their ideas of what they believe a world should look like. We didn't ask them to represent us. And we didn't ask them to put into place the policies that are going to reshape our lives. And that is precisely what's being done now. It's being done regarding climate. It's being done regarding global finance, global banking, the central bank digital currencies, World Health Organization. These aren't conspiracies. These are all policies that are either already exist or are being put into place, and lobbyists that are lobbying the governments of the nations that are involved to sign on to these principles. So it's all about moving the world toward greater levels of control, less freedom. Certainly, there has to be less freedom because that is what leads to the greater control. The centralization of life, the centralization of food, of energy, of certainly monetary systems. And it's within this context that the proposal is coming out to centralized religion, to create a single new religion based on artificial intelligence. And as you'll see, the proposal is to, quote, correct the things that are incorrect in the existing religions and the Bible specifically. Now, I want to talk about the Bible a little bit. You know, we talk about the Bible, we usually think about Christians. The Bible is a very complex document. It is both a historical document as well as a spiritual document, as well as the basis for entire religions. It serves those three purposes. There's an entire branch of archaeology called biblical archaeology, where individuals now for the better part of a century and a half have dedicated their lives to tracking down the clues left in the biblical text to the places in the world where things are said to have happened, and then they excavate to see if these things actually happened. And many, many times they have. And this is biblical archaeology bearing out the traditions that many people thought were make-believe in the Bible. And you can go into the Holy Lands and walk in the places that are referenced in this text. When we say the Bible means different things to different people. So the Hebrew Bible is based upon a book that is called the Torah. And the Torah are the biblical books, Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy. Those first 5 books are a complete Torah. When the Christian Bible was created, it incorporated the Torah into what we call the Old Testament, the Christian traditions. So you go to the King James Version of a Bible, yeah, you're going to see Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy. You're seeing the Torah that was incorporated into the Old Testament, and then additional books, additional documents, and then into the New Testament. A lot of people think that the Bible doesn't have anything to do with Islam. Well, the historical figures and the historical events in the Middle East that are referenced in the Bible are also shared and referenced in Islam, and Islam references the biblical traditions, not from the same principle and not from in the New Testament, and not the role of Jesus in the same way. But the bottom line is, to rewrite the Bible would impact not only the Christian traditions, not only the Jewish traditions, but also Islam. And those traditions combined, I just have some numbers here, make up about 56% of the world's religion. Billions of people are following traditions that are based in the biblical text, derived from those texts through either Islam or Christianity or the Jewish tradition, the Hebrew traditions. So to rewrite this book would have tremendous implications outwardly. And intuitively, to me, it just doesn't make sense. That's why I said I think it's a really bad idea. What I'd like to do is share with you technically, scientifically, deeper reasons why it's such a bad idea, because there is something so unique about the Torah that exists in no other biblical book. It is a mystery that cannot be replicated in any other religious tradition. And to rewrite the Bible would mean to rewrite this aspect of the Torah. So when we talk about Yuval Harari, one of the first questions that comes up is, who is he? And we could probably do a whole program to answer that question. And I will speak about him in another video where we're talking about the relationship between the World Economic Forum, United Nations, and a lot of governmental policies. He was born in 1976. He is called a historian and a social philosopher. So this gives you some idea of where his thinking is. And I want to be really clear, when I have these conversations with you, you know my premise. How can we solve the problems if we're not honest about the problems? This isn't about making someone wrong or even making them out to be bad. What we're looking at are technocrats, and Yuval Harari is an advocate of technology for sure, and the introduction of technology into our world and even into our bodies. So we're talking about people who are really focused on technology and what is possible with technology. However, my experience as a scientist in the scientific community is often the scientists and the technologists are so myopic. They're so zeroed in on accomplishing a technological goal, which can be done. And then you ask them, well, what are the implications of that goal? What does it mean to society? What does it mean to a family? What does it mean to a civilization? And they'll say, but that's above my pay grade. I'm not thinking about that. I mean, they'll literally say things like that. So they'll say, let someone else figure that out. We're just looking at the technology and what's possible. So when we have this conversation and we're listening to Yuval Harari, number one, either he has not thought this through or he has thought it through and has simply discounted the disastrous implications that can come from this. I don't know him. I've never met him, and I don't know which camp he is in. I want you to be aware of what it is that he's saying, because this is one piece of a bigger puzzle, and you're going to be hearing more about this. So the image that you see on your screen right now, this is Yuval Harari. And let's listen to this clip. And again, the clip is coming from it's kind of like a TED, it wasn't TED, but it was like a TED Talk kind of science forum that was held in 2023. The difference between this and a TED Talk is that in this forum, it was a conversation with an interviewer, whereas a TED Talk typically is one person doing a presentation. So here's Yuval talking about the use of AI in religion.
AI can create new ideas, can even write a new Bible. Throughout history, religions dreamt about having a book written by a superhuman intelligence, by a non-human entity. Every religion claims our book, all the other books of the other religions, humans wrote them. But our book, no. It came from some superhuman intelligence. In a few years, there might be religions that are actually correct. That just think about a religion whose holy book is written by an AI.
Yeah, and what he thinks is a really good idea, and you can see he is very passionate about this, to me is a really bad idea. I want to share with you why the foundational book of 56% of the world's religion, I believe, was written, or at least crafted. I can't say that it was written. It was crafted and it originated with a non-human intelligence. And I feel certain about that because of what this document is able to accomplish. It appeared on Earth. The Torah first appeared on Earth about 3,000 years ago. So everything I'm going to say to you, as far-fetched and as advanced as it sounds today in today's technological world, it's from a book that appeared 3,000 years ago, and we still don't know exactly where this book came from. So let me just talk about this a little bit. What Harari is saying right here is key points. Number one, he said AI might be the answer to the ancient religions describing a holy book originating from a non-human or superhuman intelligence. I believe that our Bible and the Torah specifically meets that criteria. AI may produce a religion that is actually correct. And what he's implying here is that religions that we have today are incorrect. Each religion fulfills a different role, but in a world where we are being motivated and in some cases forced toward centralization, the only way to accomplish that is to break the social bonds that have kept us together as families, communities, societies, as nations, and as a planet. And those social bonds are systematically being broken, and I've described that in other videos. The social bond of religion is one of the last bonds that remains intact. So I'm not surprised that the thinking would be to somehow remake religions as we move toward this centralized way of thinking and living between now and the year 2030. I just want to say the change required to meet that criteria is a level of psychological and emotional and mental change unlike anything in a time frame that is so compressed. Humans aren't set up to accomplish what it is that's being proposed here. So, AI Bible, why is this a really bad idea? As I mentioned, the Bible, when they say the Bible, they're talking about the Bibles that we know today that are either based in or include the Torah, those first 5 books. There's a mystery about the Torah that scientists are grappling with right now because it is so outrageous. What the Torah implies is so outrageous. And this mystery came to the scientific forefront in 1994. Now, there have always been rabbis for hundreds of years in the past that have always said that underlying the words in the Torah that we read as the letters on the page, there are coded, there's a deeper tradition, a deeper message that can only be known to initiates that understand the codes. And as you'll see, the Torah itself says that its codes will be locked until the end of time when computers, and the word computer is actually coded into the Torah, when computers can open that code, when computers can unlock the code. So rabbis for hundreds of years have been trying to unlock this code by hand. It said some of them went insane by candlelight, spending days with pieces of parchment and quill pens trying to unlock these mysterious codes. Well, it was in the mid-1990s when computers became more accessible to universities. We take them for granted today. But it was in the mid-80s, I was working in the defense industry when computers were shifting from machines that took up entire rooms to something on a desktop that could be used by an individual. And it was during that time, no surprise, that scientists began using computers in innovative ways. And in this case, Israeli scientists were using the computers to unlock the codes in the Torah. 1994, there was a paper published in a peer-reviewed journal called Statistical Science. I'll read you the title, and then we'll talk about what that means. The title is Equidistant Letter Sequences in the Book of Genesis. And the bottom line is that there is a way to read the biblical text that when we read the text using what are called skip codes or equidistant letter sequences, and again, I'm going to describe these in just a moment, that deeper meanings are revealed. So in 1994, that paper was produced, very controversial, so controversial that in 1997, a very famous experiment was run to either prove for once and for all or disprove for once and for all that there's something going on with the Torah. The idea was to take the names of 34 famous rabbis in Jewish history, and if they existed, as we believe, then they should be noted in this secret code in the Torah. Now, I just wanted to note here that what the rabbis have always said about the Torah is that it is essentially a quantum map of time. All that has ever happened in the world, all that has ever been, all that is, all that will be, is already encoded into this document that appeared on Earth 3,000 years ago. It's a quantum map of all possibilities. So this is what the scientists were struggling with. So they said, okay, if we put in these 34 famous rabbis, let's see if their names are in there. Well, not only were their names in there, but the Torah identified the place of their birth, the place of their death, the years of their birth. And what makes this especially credible is the experiment was conducted by a man named Harold Gans. He was the former senior cryptologic mathematician for the US NSA, the National Security Agency, the top secret security agency, the cryptologic agency that is dealing with so much of the AI and things like that we're seeing today. So the Torah for this experiment, it exceeded the expectations. It didn't just reveal the names. It revealed the locations, the dates of the birth, dates of the death, cities where they lived, and all of these things. And now the scientists were left with the question, how could the book 3,000 years ago, the Torah, have known about this information? Number one. Number two, this is where it gets really interesting. What else is encoded in that Torah? So that began a series of experiments that continue to this day. So let me talk to you a little bit about how information is encoded into the Torah, and then let's look at some of the codes that have been revealed. And I think you begin to see why it would be a really bad idea to use AI to rewrite the Bible when the first 5 books of the Bible include this mysterious document that we call the Torah. So I'm going to begin every alphabet that has ever existed in the history of the world, without exception, has always been linked to 2 levels of information. One is the information revealed through the words and the letters as we read them with the naked eye. All right. Secondly, every letter has always been linked to a mysterious number. No one knows for sure where the numbers came from. The numbers never change. They are constant. And it is through the mathematic sequences of the written words that the computer is able to reveal deeper information in the Torah. So what you're seeing on the screen right now, there's the Hebrew letters, and then there are the values of those letters. Now, some people will call this numerology, and I want to be clear, it is not. It is actually an ancient science called gematria that was defined by 32 rabbinical rules in the 2nd century. So in the 2nd century, there's a rabbi that identified 32 rules. If you're going to work in gematria, or sometimes called gematria, you must follow these rules. Numerology is a later subset of the gematria and is a looser subset. Numerology does not always follow all the rabbinical rules, those 32 rules. So it takes a little bit more liberties. So this is what we're looking at. And every alphabet, English, cuneiform, Sanskrit, Chinese, Arabic, I mean, every language that has ever been created has these numbers. Some are acknowledged more than others. So what happens with the Torah code? And this is going to go back to the original interpretation of the Torah and how it was received. If you watch Charlton Heston movies back in the 60s and 70s, ingrained in our minds, those of us old enough to have seen those, we see Charlton Heston coming down from Mount Sinai after he had an encounter with God. And in each arm, he's got a huge tablet of stone engraved with the 10 Commandments. But also, it was said during that time, the Torah was revealed to him. So this is the way we typically think about this. New interpretations of the text now suggest the entire Torah was encoded into a crystalline substance, not necessarily a crystal, but a crystalline substance that fit into the palm of a single hand. And when the Ark of the Covenant is revealed and made public, we will see that is the case. The way the Torah was revealed is that it is said to have come in a continuous string of letters, no punctuation, no spaces, a continuous string of information. And it's with that in mind that the computer scientists converted the Torah that we see today, every letter of the Torah, into its number equivalent. All right. And what they have is a matrix. And it's a matrix. It's a computer matrix held in the memory of the computer, a total of 304,805 numbers. Exactly. The Torah has exactly 304,805 letters. And that's a very significant number. Those of you that study the Torah, you know that. The computer scientists arranged these numbers in the way that is believed the Torah was received on Sinai, into a matrix with no spaces, no punctuation, 64 rows of 4,772 numbers each. This is the way it is believed that the Torah was originally received in the deep Kabbalistic traditions. You don't hear a lot about this typically, but I want to share this with you so you can see why it's so important not to rewrite the Torah. All right. Now, we're all familiar with a 2D matrix. And when you look at a Bible with the naked eye, that's what you're seeing is a 2D matrix. You're seeing the x-axis goes across the sentences, or if you're reading in Hebrew, it goes from right to left, and then top of the page to down, just kind of like the matrix, in the movie you're seeing on the screen. Here's what happened. The computer scientists were able to arrange the information in the Torah into not a two-dimensional matrix, but a multi-dimensional matrix, and not just any old kind of a matrix, what is called a dynamic multi-dimensional matrix. Let me explain what that means. So on the screen, what you're seeing, here's a two-dimensional matrix of parts of the Torah converted into the numbers, no punctuation and no letters. All right, that's a two-dimensional matrix. Now, this is kind of a mind blower. In a dynamic matrix, what happens is the arrangement of all of the information in that matrix It identifies a path. Some people would call this a timeline. If you're following the information on the time, the quantum timelines that we are following as we barrel down the road toward the end of the cycle that we're living in, we live a timeline. And you live a timeline. We have our personal timelines, and then they all merge into collective timelines for families and communities and societies that merge into collective timelines for nations and for a planet. So there are timelines within timelines within timelines, all right? Now, the matrix of the Torah represents those timelines, but here's the mind blower. The dynamic part of the matrix is every time a choice is made, the entire matrix has to rearrange itself to accommodate that choice, to formulate the new quantum possibilities that now are available because that choice was made. So for example, let's just use a silly example here. You are in high school and you have a high school sweetheart. All right, and you two come together as partners in high school, okay? Now, your personal timelines have now merged into a collective timeline, and you begin in a quantum reality, quantum possibilities. If you stay together, and if you have children together, and you spend your entire life together, that is one quantum timeline. But if you're together 10 years and then you break up, and you end up going with someone else, now you've branched off of that timeline. So the possibilities in your life have just shifted because you are no longer with the energy of that same person. So your timelines have shifted. Now that, I think we all can wrap our minds around that. The mind blower is that the Torah matrix accounts for those shifts. Every time one of us makes a choice in our lives, the entire matrix, energetically, it has to rearrange itself to accommodate that. And there are about 8 billion people on the planet, so 8 billion timelines are being accommodated. This matrix began 3,000 years ago, so there is a 3,000-year a timeline that is being accommodated here, and all this is being done in the computer. This is the dynamic nature of this, not only multi-dimensional, but a hyper-dimensional matrix, and that's what I'm illustrating here on the screen right now. The matrix is so complex that it not only accommodates every choice that we make, but as we make those choices, it lays out the quantum potential for every choice that is now possible based upon all the choices that we just made. This is in a document that appeared on Earth 3,000 years ago. And when the scientists began the experiments with the Torah, they discovered what I'm saying to you right now. And they said, okay, well, maybe this is just a fluke. You know, as crazy as it is, maybe it's just lucky. Let's see if it works in any other documents. And they took books like War and Peace and like Moby Dickens and like the telephone books from large cities. And they converted all of those into numbers and loaded all of those into the computer multi-dimensional, dynamic, hyperdimensional matrices. Say that 5 times in a row and not have a smile on your face when you're doing it. And the bottom line is no other document produced the kinds and the quality of information that we're going to get into. I'm going to show you. If you've never seen this, I think you're going to be pretty amazed at what you see. The point here is it is only possible because of the way the letters are arranged in this book that was given to the people of the earth 3,000 years ago. That's the basis for 56% of the world's major religions. Even though the religions may not see eye to eye with one another, they have their foundation in a common history in those first 5 books. You don't want to rewrite those books. You don't want to rewrite, especially not with AI. And I'll tell you why in just a moment. All right, so now we're talking about a hyper-dimensional matrix. Every choice that's made has to change that entire matrix. This is very, very complex computer science, as you can imagine. So Why? What is the purpose of converting the Torah into numbers, putting those numbers into this multidimensional, hyperdimensional matrix? Well, the answer is then the computers can do the searches through computer algorithms that the rabbis used to try to do by hand and went crazy doing. The computers don't go crazy. It's a piece of cake for the computers. Once you give them the algorithm, they can search. And they're searching the matrix with what is called, we mentioned this earlier, ELS sequences, equidistant letter sequences. So let me show you quickly what one of these searches look like. Then I will illustrate what an ELS, an equidistant letter search, is. Then we'll get into the juicy stuff. We'll get into some of the correlations and relationships that have been found encoded into the Torah, and they'll make sense to you because you now understand where they're coming from. So what you're seeing on the screen is a screenshot, a snapshot from one of the programs that runs the search. And what happens is first of all, the queries have to be made in the Hebrew language, because that's the language that the document was received in. If it was received in cuneiform, we'd be querying in cuneiform. So the query has to come in the Hebrew language. And what happens is the computer then will search within a given distance, and the user defines what is called a statistically significant distance. I know this might sound a little technical to some people, but I want you to see how this works. It's not hocus pocus. This is peer-reviewed science. So they define a range within which information is going to be statistically meaningful, and the computer will search vertically on the y-axis, horizontally on the x-axis, and diagonally on what is called the z-axis as well. And when it has a hit, it will do what you're seeing on the screen right now. And so if you query for the name Gregg, for example, and by the way, my name is in this matrix and so is yours. Every name of every human who's ever walked the earth is in this matrix. And we've done live events where we've input the names of the people and everybody that gave a name, their name is in there, date of birth, where they're from, all of those kinds of, we're all in there. All that is, all that has ever been, or all that is, all that has been, all that is, and all that will ever be is encoded into this document. That's the mind blower, because we don't even have the technology to do something like that today. So it would come up looking like what you're seeing right now. So when we get into this, you'll know what it is that you're looking at. Let's talk about an ELS. What is an electronic skip sequence? It is a number that is selected by you, the user. You tell the computer to begin with the letter T, for example, for Torah. This is an example I'm going to give you in just a moment. The computer looks for the first appearance of the letter T, and then you give the computer the skip code for the next letter that you're looking for to find some meaningful information. So the skip code determines how many letters you go over. For example, in the book of Genesis, the ancient rabbis discovered a skip code of 50. What does that mean? Here's what it means. By the way, once again, Hebrew is read from right to left. So when you look into the Torah, and the letter A is, the vowels are not used in the Hebrew language as vowels. They're indicated through the dots, but they're not written out. So the letter A you're not going to find in the word Torah. So this first book of the Bible. So here it is. The letter T, there's the first letter T that appears. Now you do a skip code of 50, and the next letter just happens to be O. Now, is that a coincidence or not? This is the way it's encoded. Then you skip 50 more letters, and you've got the letter R, and 50 more, and you've got the letter H. So a skip code of 50 in the book of Genesis reveals the name of the book that you are reading. It is the Torah, and it reveals more from there. So this illustrates how a skip code works. You can use 10, 5, you can use any number for a skip code, all right? This information was first revealed to the public in 1997 in a New York Times best-selling book. And I was working as a senior computer scientist in the defense industry. The company at that time was called Martin Marietta Defense Systems. Now it is Lockheed Martin. And there's other videos I've talked about why I ended up there. I didn't apply for the job. I was placed there because of expertise that I had. And I don't want to be redundant again, but this is when this book came out. And it was a mysterious book. The reason the book was such a splash is because it was written by Michael Drosnin, by the way, who just passed recently. Unfortunately, he's no longer with us. He was a journalist. Michael Drosnin understood the skip codes. He understood the Torah codes. And what happened was that he went to the mathematicians that had developed these codes and written that paper in statistical science. And they found that the prime minister of Israel at that time, his name was Yitzhak Rabin. The Torah code said that if Yitzhak Rabin went to a certain location on a certain date that was encoded into the Torah and gave a talk on that date, that he would be assassinated. And Michael Drosnin said, we need to let Yitzhak Rabin know this. So they did. And Rabin was a deep believer, a deeply spiritual man. And he said, if it's written in the Torah, then it's meant to be. I'm not going to change my plans. He went to the location on the date at the time. He turned down the street that was indicated in the Torah, and a lone assassin, it's believed to be a lone assassin, did assassinate Yitzhak Rabin exactly as revealed in the Torah 3,000 years before it ever happened. He was assassinated November 5th, 1995. The reason for his assassination was because he, along with Sadat, were working toward peace as the representative of Prime Minister of Israel, and Sadat was Egyptian, Yasser Arafat is who you're seeing here. Yasser Arafat represented the Palestinians. These two men wanted peace, and Bill Clinton facilitated a meeting between them at the time, and the closest that we've ever come to a peace deal in the Middle East was between these two men. However, there was a faction of individuals on both sides that did not want the peace because there were concessions that were made to achieve that peace, and they didn't want those concessions. And Yitzhak Rabin lost his life because of the concessions he made trying to achieve peace in the Middle East. Yasser Arafat was not assassinated. He died later on. He never was able to get close to that deal again. It was, many people say it was the closest we've ever come. Here is the Torah code that reveals, this is what Michael Drosnin saw that took him to Yasser Arafat. It revealed that this was going to happen before it ever did. And now you can think back to what I said earlier in this conversation. One query is indicated in red, another query is indicated in blue, and you can see where they're intersecting here indicates that they are related. Yitzhak Rabin, the name Yitzhak Rabin was entered into the computer, and it showed up vertically in red, and that's what you're seeing. In the blue was the word assassin, and what ended up showing up was assassin who will assassinate. This is what you're seeing in the blue, and they actually cross one another right here. So you're seeing this. It was encoded, again, 3,000 years before it happened, but it didn't stop there. Look at how much further it went. What we see in another query as the people that were working with the code, as they asked deeper questions, what we see in kind of with a flat-topped pyramid, the name of the assassin is indicated. In the diamond shape, his name was Amir, and Amir was the man that assassinated Yitzhak Rabin. In the square, the name of the assassin who will assassinate, and then the name Yitzhak Rabin. So you can see that these all either intersect or they are what is called within statistically significant range of this matrix. This is a divine matrix that we're seeing here made of the Torah. So this is the information that Michael Drosnin took to Yitzhak Rabin. Yitzhak Rabin said, if it's in the Torah, it must be. it's God's will, and he went forward, and it happened just as it was written here. Now, the investigators did a little experiment after the assassination happened, and they said, what if Yitzhak Rabin had chosen not to go? What if he listened to the warning and he didn't go? The Torah code, I don't have it on the screen, but the Torah code came up and said assassination delayed. Assassination delayed. So it's not that it wasn't going to happen, it just wouldn't have happened at the same time. So how could this be? This is, I'm going to give you a series of examples of information that's encoded into the Torah. I'm just going to tell you right now, everything that is queried is encoded in the Torah. The names of all the great wars of the world, what countries entered, the year they entered, the years the wars ended, who the leaders of the country were, the birth dates of the leaders, when the leaders died. And it's not just bad things, good things have happened as well. The election of presidents, you'll see Obama is encoded in here. Clinton was encoded in here. Trump is encoded for his first election, was in the Torah codes. Now, I want to say something here. I'm going to be really clear about this. The Torah code does not predict what will happen. So you can't say what's going to happen in a certain year. You have to enter the key words, and the Torah will show you those words and how they're related to other events, because they are all possible. And this is why this is so important. It appears to be a quantum map of all possibilities, not what must happen, but what may happen if nothing changes the events. So, for example, when, after the fact, when the word atomic holocaust was entered into the Torah code. Now, I put this in here intentionally because I want you to see this. A lot of people are afraid that we're going to have an atomic war in Eastern Europe, in Ukraine, between Russia and America and Ukraine. I'm not saying it's impossible for it to happen. What I'll say is that the Torah only identifies two places in history where the word atomic holocaust comes up. One of them is right here, the Jewish year 5705, or the Julian year 1945. 1945 are the squares, and the circle, atomic holocaust. Look at they intersect right there. What country? Japan. And you see that in the diamonds and the statistically significant distance from when this happened. So that did happen, and we know that. This was Hiroshima, this was Nagasaki, three days later. The other place for the atomic holocaust was during the Cold War in the 1980s, and there were events that changed that outcome, and we don't see anywhere in the Torah codes, in the Bible codes, the word atomic holocaust again. Now, it doesn't mean that we couldn't have a limited exchange, as they're talking about. One side, lobs what's called a tactical nuke or something like that. But the Holocaust, where you see many mushroom clouds on the horizon wiping out entire civilizations, does not come up again in the Torah codes. And to me, I think that's good news, and I wanted to share that with you. Kennedy's assassination was in here 3,000 years before it happened. When they entered the name President Kennedy, and you see it in the circle, it links into the words "to die," and then right next to that in the diagonal is the city Dallas, where it happened. How did the Torah know to link that information together? Then they went deeper, and here it is. Oswald was the name of the assassin. Now, there may be others involved, but Oswald is the one that was identified. He was a marksman, and you see that in the triangles, and he was. Name of assassin who will assassinate, very similar to Yitzhak Rabin. They did the same thing here, and you see that in the square. Again, 3,000 years before it happened, 9/11. There's all kinds of Torah codes about September 11th, how it happened. Here you see in the circles, Twin Towers. Right next to that in the diamonds or the word towers, it knocked down twice, and then you see airplane off onto the side. And here's a more detailed color-coded Torah sample where you can see the words murder, Twin Tower, attack, thousands. The word bin Laden comes up there as well. So on the right-hand side of the screen in the color is translated what you see on the left-hand side of the screen in color, and the right-hand side it's in English, and the left-hand side it's in Hebrew. So you can see how all of this worked. Obama's election, here it is right here. Barack Obama, his name, you see it in the blue. President, you see that in the pink. In the USA, in the red, you see in the bottom. Your father, which is very interesting because he wrote a book about his father. Islamic intersects horizontally right above the name Barack Obama. So you see this revealed in the Torah code. The origin of humans. I mean, this goes on and on. We could spend all night on this. The origin of humans. Where did we come from? What you can see when that was entered was DNA spiral. In Adam was the model, the template from a code. And you see where these things intersect, suggesting that we're not the product of random evolutionary processes, as I have said for 40 years. The evidence doesn't support that. The DNA evidence doesn't support that. One of the things, and I'm just going to show you this last one, what we see in the biblical text is that we are barreling down the road towards some kind of outcome, and you feel the events are accelerating. Feels like what people say a rubber band is being stretched so tight, something's got to give. From the biblical perspective, that give is a last great battle that will happen on the plains of what is called Armageddon near Megiddo in the Holy Lands. When you query this in the Bible, this is really interesting. Armageddon, Megiddo, Mount Megiddo. And by the way, if you're with us on any of our trips to Holy Lands, we go to these places so we can stand and have our experiential processes at these places. But what it says is Assad Holocaust. Assad, of course, is the president of Syria. There's a lot of tension that is happening. There's a war that is happening in Syria, essentially a proxy war between the U.S. and Russia in Syria right now. It said Assad Holocaust, shooting from the military post. This is interesting because the Israelis have the high point looking down into Syria from what is called the Golan Heights. And it says this is where the Battle of Armageddon will occur. The reason I want you to see this, look at what this says. Look at what I showed you in red up here. Well, first of all, it says it was supposed to happen. It could have happened in the year 2000. It says it was delayed. So we did not have this Armageddon battle in the year 2000. But look at this. Look at this. In the year 1996, there where you see the squares right there highlighted in red are words that you will see come up in many of the Bible codes. And I think this is the reason I'm for this whole conversation. And those words say, they're talking about a Holocaust of Israel. You delayed it. And what they say is, will you change it? There's a message encoded with some of the most horrible tragedies you could ever imagine that are identified. When you put the words in, they come up and they say, yeah, they're a possibility. But then the code comes up and look at what it says. Will you change it? This implies that this code is not predicting what will happen. It is a map of possibilities, a map of potential, and that we always have choice. We always have free will. And I wanted you to see that here. Will you change it invites us to shift that timeline, to make choices so that the timeline leading to that Holocaust doesn't happen. The same thing happens with the atomic holocausts of the world, the great battles of the world, all of the horrible things you can imagine. Will you change it? It's up to us. We have a choice. So I wanted you to see this. I want you to see this because your name, as I mentioned, your name is in the Torah codes. Every name of every human I've ever entered is in the Torah codes. We're all in there because we're all in this together. Now, I want to stay focused on the reason I'm sharing this with you. There was a proposal for AI to rewrite the Bible. That would mean that AI rewrites the first 5 books of the Bible. That would mean that AI is rewriting the Torah. the Torah is a mysterious book of supernatural origin. It has to be, because not even the best scientists today can create the dynamic, hyper-dimensional computer matrix that accommodates all of the choices and rearranges the matrix for individuals and collectively all at the same time, hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of million times a day this is happening. What intelligence created this? I don't know the answer to that, but it wasn't humans. So we already have a document from non-human or superhuman intelligence. We're only beginning to understand what it means. To rewrite the Bible would mean to rewrite that text or possibly to discount that text altogether. That is a really bad idea for all the reasons I've just shared. Another thing that I want to say here, and I mentioned this in, don't want to be too redundant, but this was in a previous video about artificial intelligence itself. AI operates on the algorithms created by humans. Those algorithms reflect the bias of the person creating the algorithms, what they believe to be true, what their fears are. And then the AI goes out into the World Wide Web and it collects information. That information is the product of all the censorship and all the bias that we have had, at least since the year 2020. So the AI that is proposed to rewrite the Bible, it's already skewed. It's already biased. That's not the AI you want to write the spiritual traditions for half or all of the world's religious traditions. So this is where I wanted to go with this. You know, I mentioned earlier, and this is so powerful, in the book of Daniel, it actually says that the Torah is a code and that the code is sealed until the end of time. Here it is right here in the blocks horizontal on the x-axis. To shut up the words and seal the book until the end of time. The word time is cut off on the right-hand side. But look at what is in the circles, computer. The computer is what unlocks these codes. We now have the technology and we have the knowledge to unlock the codes that were left to us over 3,000 years ago. They were given to the people in the Middle East to preserve, to the Jewish people. Not for them to hoard, but to preserve for all of humankind until the end of time, when we could open those codes and reveal them to the world. And this is why in the Hebrew traditions, every Torah that was created by hand, if one letter was miswritten, it said it could change the world forever. If one letter changed, and people said, well, that's crazy. How could that be? You can see now how that could be, because one letter would change the information that's contained in the Torah. In my humble opinion, there's some things that we don't want to mess with. And the Bible is one of those things. The world's religions, the last bastion of social coherency that brings us together, I think is worth preserving. You know, Albert Einstein said very famously that time does not flow only in one direction and that the future exists simultaneously with the past. The Torah tells us that this is true, not as a religious document, but as a highly advanced, technologically sophisticated matrix of quantum possibilities that appeared on this planet 3,000 years ago and can serve us today. We have the knowledge and we have the technology. The question is, do we have the wisdom? The deeper question that we ask so many times, do we love ourselves enough to allow for the possibilities revealed through the Torah in our lives? Do we love ourselves enough to embrace the deep truth of what is revealed without judging who has preserved it or where it comes from? We're not going to have to wait long to find out how we answer that question, because the heat is on, the pressure's on, to know what is revealed in the Torah and to preserve it in the presence of AI, rather than allow the AI to rewrite some of the most ancient and cherished traditions that right now are the basis of 56% of the world's population and the religions they believe in. So once again, some things we don't want to mess with. The Bible is one of them.